that's where equanimity is really a good thing. Like, let's stop judging. If that person's shut down and that person's anxious, that person's irritable, we're all the same. So let's have some compassion for each other and for ourselves. We are compromised, all of us. Every one of us is compromised right now. Even the kids that are playing out in the street, they know something's off. They can feel it. So everybody is a notch less capable than usual. What do? We help us restore the sense of well-being, restore the sense of safety. Those guys had to do that in bunkers and in bomb shelters in generations past. They had to restore their sense of well-being in this moment right now because it's the only thing.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 99. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I want you to know that I hear ya. For some of us, this pandemic with shelter-in-place orders came as a shock, but it wasn't really too much of a leap to work from home, to hustle to make sure that our home was fully stocked with everything that we needed for a few weeks at a time, to put our brain to the task of problem-solving, making quick pivots, changing our products and services, forming or joining or shifting to online communities, to modify our behaviors in some ways against our own natures to maintain social distance and keep everyone safe. And as the weeks go on, we may be okay, but we're not okay. There are the obvious emotions: fear, anxiety, loneliness, and then there are the harder to pinpoint feelings: grief, distrust, and even, I know this sounds dramatic, yes, existential dread. So today, we're shifting the conversation away from being responsive in terms of what to do in your creative work, and rather toward being responsive in terms of how to be in your creative experience today. This conversation is with one of my mentors, psychotherapist, teacher, and musician, Ellen Katz. Ellen was one of the first people I ever had on The Creative Imposter way back on episode 10 in 2015. And here we are, almost to episode 100. It is my joy and honor to have her back, helping us navigate our minds and our spirits in this really weird time and space. I do want to take a quick moment to invite you to connect with me. We are currently hosting twice weekly Zoom community sessions, and while, yes, it's not the same as meeting in person, these sessions have been a wonderful opportunity to stay in touch with friends old and new, and they've provided a much-needed structure to my week. It is free to join us. There's no obligation to come more than once, though we'd love to have you back. And you can get the details by joining the Creative Imposter Facebook group, linked in the show notes in your app and at thecreativeimposter.com/099. There you will also find links to schedule a consultation with me about starting your own podcast, or take a deep dive session into the creative laboratory together for your existing show, as well as links to connect with Ellen and even join us live in the Chicagoland area once our band in which we sing together, the Bhakti Caravan, can regroup and begin offering sacred mantras with audience participation and a world music vibe once again. Thank you for being here. Now, take a deep breath in and out and tune in for this therapeutic session with Ellen Katz. And Ellen Katz, wearing your psychotherapist hat today. Thank you for joining me again on The Creative Imposter.
My pleasure.
How's your day so far?
It's another day in quarantine. No, it's another day of surreal existence, which I think everybody's kind of going through. You look at people walking by, and on one hand, everything looks sort of normal, and then it feels very abnormal, which is kind of a segue into some of the stuff that I'd love to talk about.
What I did, just so you know, that I have here is I made a compiled list of some of the basic emotions that have been coming up either for me or for community members.
Hmm.
Because I think I mentioned to you, I've been doing twice weekly Zoom calls with mostly creative women. The Zoom call is really just like a check in, and we do something positive since the last time we checked in, and then a gripe or something that's challenging us. And then one personal or professional productivity item for the day. And I've also been doing this series of interviews for the podcast with other creative individuals and entrepreneurs and business owners and artists, talking about what changes, pivots, adaptations they're making, and also how they're coping personally. And so I've been creating this little list of what people have been telling me or what people have been sharing. And I kind of want to go through each of these and see what your thoughts are. But in general, when you reached out to me, and I had you on my mind to reach out to you, but then when you reached out to me first, what were you thinking? Like, what has sort of been the general overall feeling you've been working with?
There's a very, very, very big one. It's right in my face. People are trying to figure out how to fix a problem. That's what the mind will always do. We're trying to figure this out. And it takes us into the future, and it takes us into the past, and it takes us into all kinds of what ifs. And of course, we know that futurizing is literally a recipe for anxiety. So whenever we start wondering what we're going to do and we're facing so many unknown variables, it's an impossible task, right? So we're setting ourselves up for constant agitation. The cure for that, of course, is to continue to come back into the present moment. Because if we don't take advantage of how our bodies recalibrate themselves automatically and effortlessly, when we just give it a chance to be present, then in the present moment, we can kind of reevaluate what thoughts about the future are legitimate, can we really have some control over, and what thoughts are just triggers for more anxiety. So that is one thing, is the thinking about the future fuels our fear. But even more insidious, to be honest, one other thing, and that is that our brain is set up to look for discrepancies. What's not right about this picture? Something's off. I don't hear airplanes, or there's no traffic, or people are standing 6 feet apart or not. Either way, that's a discrepancy. There's so many discrepancies. The brain will automatically begin to trigger more cortisol and other stress hormones the minute we see a discrepancy, because that's what it's supposed to do. And for anybody who happens to have had some trauma in the past, or some addiction in the past, or some codependency in the past, or you name it, their brain is already hyper alert and ready to go with a lot of vigilance and unheeded, unconscious stress. And where that brings us, and I'm almost done with my long run on sentence here, is it brings us to a state of vulnerability that we're not even fully aware of. We can check ourselves like, am I anxious today? I'm only at about a 3. That's okay. Or am I fearful? No, I know what I'm doing today. Okay, so let's say we're really good at this. We're good at self-regulating. We're good at meditating. We're good at doing our yoga and all that stuff. And if by all accounts, we look fine. But here's the other thing. What about the under the radar, just constant drip of something's off, that the brain is picking up on, but the conscious mind is not? So my message is, assume that some parts of you, your body at least, is experiencing messages from the environment that you're vulnerable. And if you can acknowledge it, it eases the stress of that vulnerability. It's like if your little dog or cat hears an unexpected sound and they perk up and they're in that hypervigilant state, the minute you soothe them with your voice or your touch, and you say, everything's okay right now. That's what we kind of need for ourselves. And even if we don't know if everything's okay, in this moment, I'm okay. And it's okay to not know what's going to happen, because we are resilient beings. And in the next moment, we'll have more ideas of what our possibilities are and our choices, as long as we stay present with ourselves. So that's kind of the full Monty response to your question.
Yeah, that resonates, the hypervigilance and that feeling of something being off. I mean, one of the things that has been coming up, and definitely for me, is this idea of, do I go outside and go for a walk, or do I stay home?
Mm-hmm.
And I went for one walk outside last week and almost immediately went back home because I had never seen so many people out in my neighborhood.
Wow.
As many listeners know, I live in Chicago. It's very population dense. And I tried to pick a time of day where I think of like the dog walking times as like before and after work. But what I wasn't thinking about is that before and after work
Doesn't
kind of
matter
don't
anymore.
mean anything. Yeah. So I went at like 2 o'clock or 2:30 in the afternoon, which would normally be a dead time except for school getting out. And I knew school was not getting out. And there were so many people out in my neighborhood and it didn't feel safe. My shoulders were up by my ears within a few minutes. My jaw was clenched.
Yeah,
And it's like, in all practical purposes, I wasn't in any danger,
correct.
but I was so stressed out trying to walk and enjoy the fresh air that I just went home.
You're bringing up another really interesting point, and I say this to patients often, which is just because your body says you're in danger doesn't mean you're in danger. That means we need to engage kind of a conversation with that wise mind, that very calm, centered place inside. And even if you don't feel like you have access to it internally, you can ask externally, like, what would Jesus say? Or what would my higher power say? Or what would my wise mind say? So if I stop and ask myself, am I really in danger? And you just pause a minute. So my newest acronym, or whatever you want to call it, is PBS: pause, breathe, slow down, and then you can listen to the questions. Then you can look
Mm.
at what is all out there on your table, all the things you know. I know that there are people around. Can I actually be safe in this world that I'm looking at right this second? That would take your prefrontal cortex, your higher intelligence to assess. You don't want to use your body's instinct because it may be wrong. It may just be reading the fact that something's odd, something's off as being the danger sign. See what I mean?
Mhm.
So we've got that added complexity of the body can be telling us something, but it may not be true. A lot of us get signals of danger when it's not really danger, it's just a discrepancy. And then we have to really kind of go back and assess it with our wise mind.
And that's interesting because I think for a lot of us who do intuitive practices or mindfulness practices,
Hmm.
we're taught to trust our intuition, trust our instincts, trust your gut, pay attention to the messages your body's giving. Like how many times in yoga practice, pay attention
Yeah.
to what your body's telling you.
So the next step is you always want to trust it as a messenger, but don't trust necessarily the interpreter in your mind. And this is a neuropsych thing. See, this one part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's there to interpret cues when you are in a fight or flight situation. Now, and this happens to be true for a lot of folks, if in your early childhood there was a lot of disruption of any kind, guess what, kids? This could even mean in your mom's life before you were born, when you were in utero. But when there's disruption, the amygdala, it becomes activated that young. And the more active it is, it actually grows. So those people who've had what we call complex trauma actually have more activated amygdalas, and they're going to jump right in there and they're going to say, I got it. I know the reason why. I know what's wrong. This is dangerous. But really, it isn't necessarily dangerous. It's just a discrepancy. So yes, the messenger is accurate. The interpretation of the message requires mindfulness, which is very different than gut, okay, or body. Bodies are always telling us truth, but the interpretation of what it's telling us, that requires that we access that higher self, that higher intelligence, and we've got to be calm for that. We've got to be present for that. We literally don't have contact with the prefrontal cortex if we're in a fight or flight state. This is why arguing is such a drag with your partner or your friend, because if you get triggered and then their anxiety gets triggered, then they're triggered, then it's what Eckhart Tolle calls, we are in the madness of being in our pain bodies, and we're not really present with ourselves. So we're not present in that conversation. So the best thing we can do is, if we're called upon to make a decision, a judgment call, have an intense discussion or a heated or a crucial conversation, we want to do that. We want to make sure that we guard the sanctity of that decision making as best we can by using our tools of breathing, coming back into the body, embodiment, offering some kind of affirmation to ourselves, like all is well right now in this moment. I am here, I'm fully in alignment, and I am supported by the universe. And then to know, literally to affirm in ourselves, I am resilient, I can do this, I can hear you, and I don't have to be scared. Or I can address this question and I don't have to be freaked out. I can be here and look at all the pieces of the puzzle and not let it mean that I'm in danger just because I don't see how those puzzle pieces go together immediately.
Yeah, it goes back to the present moment thing, because I think, I hear that message a lot from so many teachers and practitioners as the remedy, right? Staying present, not launching yourself into the future all the time. Futurizing, is that what you
I
said?
just made that up. I like it.
I like it. But it's easier said than done to bring yourself back to that present moment. It's easy to let yourself go to another time, time travel, especially when we have these fears. And that was one of the emotions that I had that has been coming up, is fear of the obvious. Like, I am afraid that I will get sick. I am afraid that my loved one will get sick. I am afraid of income loss, whether that is already happening or it might happen. And these fears are like amplified and heightened. And then what I hear you saying is, it's not that you're not thinking about the future. It's not that you're in denial of things we may have to address in the future, but that you can make better decisions when you're not already in the future.
Okay, so let's take this real slowly. Basically, we could call it being in a present mind consciousness. I like that phrase. So when we are really grounded in the present moment, then we have a way better shot at looking at things that normally could set us off in that amygdala response. But we can look at it from a more dispassionate way, right? Like a lot of times I'll actually say to somebody, I want you to pretend that you're looking at the movie of yourself. See yourself. What does that person really thrive on in life? What do they love? What do they really need? You know them. What do they need? And you could look at a friend of yours or yourself and you could say, she needs meaningful conversations. She needs to feel connected. She needs to have self-care. She needs time with someone that she cares about. She needs to have meaningful work. Okay, so now we've got a dispassionate ability to look at that person and what she needs. Then we've got those categories. And then we can say, how am I doing with that in my own life? Am I giving myself energy in all those areas? And then that's a really good way to figure out what you're ignoring that you need. And when you're ignoring something that you need to thrive, then you're going to be compromised and you're going to be much more vulnerable to all of these things. So it's kind of layered. We take care of ourselves in a mindful way. We're able to step into a stressful situation with more skill and more resilience potentially. We can't go into denial, you're right, but we need to sort of set ourselves up to be in present time consciousness before we start dealing with those things. But you also brought up something that I think is really important, and that is we know the things that we're going to be worrying about or that maybe are going to pop up on the horizon of our concerns. But there is another part of us, the wise woman, let's say, or the wise man in each of us, that can say, is that thought really something that I need to be addressing right this minute? Am I really equipped to address it? So that observing self kind of has to have more of a presence, like hold everything, you guys. That's an important question, but we'll figure that one out as we get a little further down the road. There's too many unknowns. It's almost like accessing the adult in us, the real wise adult in us that can slow the kids down when they start getting too agitated. And the kids are all these thoughts that are coming up, but yeah, mommy, what? Am I going to, what's going to happen? And as you can see, they're kind of anxiety driven and they need a mommy or a daddy to put its hand on their head and go, hold on, hold your horses, slow it down, PBS, pause, breathe, slow down. And I think if we could all commit to being a little bit more aware of the cues in our body that tell us we're starting to get revved up. Fast speech, rapid thinking, hypervigilance. Flip side of that, Andrea, which is really interesting, is for people that are what we call parasympathetically dominant. When they get anxious, they shut down. So if you're doing a lot of numbing out, shutting down, spacing out, dissociating, that's just another version of anxiety. If you're getting really irritable, if you're getting constantly hooked on the news, reactivity, judging, wanting to get in a fight, that's just anxiety. This is one big, long continuum. That's where equanimity is really a good thing. Like, let's stop judging. If that person's shut down and that person's anxious, that person's irritable, we're all the same. So let's have some compassion for each other and for ourselves. We are compromised, all of us. Every one of us is compromised right now. Even the kids that are playing out in the street, they know something's
Hmm.
off. They can feel it. So everybody is a notch less capable than usual of handling things. What do? We help us restore the sense of well-being, restore the sense of safety. Those guys had to do that in bunkers and in bomb shelters in generations past. They had to restore their sense of well-being in this moment right now because it's the only thing.
Yeah, for sure. And it had me thinking about one of the things that I had here about a feeling that I've been hearing a lot and experiencing is this feeling of lethargy and just not being able to have your normal energy versus all of the messaging out there right now, especially in the creative entrepreneurship world, that's like,
Yeah.
now is the time to write that book you've been thinking of and learn a new language and do all these fun activities with your kids and take 500 yoga classes. And while people are grateful for opportunities to do yoga online or have access to free learning, a lot of us are just like, who are these people that can do all this stuff right now? I can barely keep up with my normal functioning.
A lot of creative people have on the Myers-Briggs, I don't know if you know it, but it's called the
Mhm.
Myers-Briggs Personality Inventory, MBPI. Anybody can take it online for free. If you happen to be a P preference, that means you don't have a whole lot of internal structure, okay? It's just not your gig. And so when you get a day without structure, and then another day without structure, and then another day, what it's telling your brain, certainly something's different. It's also saying, I don't have any deadlines. I don't have any reasons that I have to. And those are the things that we Ps rely on to get us motivated. We don't really have that inherent motivation to get on the stick and start doing something productive. We tend to be more like dreamers or distractors. In a way, we're just kind of definitely being spontaneous in life. So, I mean, it has been said that creating some gentle structure for ourselves in this time is actually a form of self love because that routine, even like I'm a really strong P, I'm not a structured person by nature. And so, as a mother, when I had a young child, I had a hard time doing structure for her, but she needed it because kids need that. They don't need authority figures, but they do need to know that there's some consistency. So, the kid in us benefits from I'm going to be taking this 8 a.m. yoga class and I'm going to give myself a bedtime routine and I'm going to, I guess what maybe one theme is that I'm letting you see that's kind of one of my little, I don't know, precious gems that I hold close to me is that we're all basically, as adults, we've become our own parents. And if we don't step into that in a mindful way, in a way that's deliberate, like what kind of parent do I want to be for me? Because me is a child, me is a creative type, me is all these different parts. Okay. Me is ambitious. Me is insecure. Me is all these things. We've got all these parts. But at the helm needs to be, she's not pushy or bossy or he, but just the quiet wisdom that's there that the parts can check in with and that can also reach in and slow us down or support us if we need to be held up, you know? But listen to that wise parent inside of you. From saying to anybody who's listening, that wise parent is a part of you that you can trust. It's not a bad authority
Mhm.
figure. It's a supportive authority that loves and sees from a higher place and can say, girl, you aren't moving your body enough. What are we going to do? It's collaborative. It's smart. It knows you. It knows you don't like to be told what to do. At least mine does. I do not like to be told what to do. So mine says, okay, Ellen, let's negotiate. What can you handle? you know, what are we going to do? Let's take one baby step closer to something that we know is going to be really life enhancing.
Yeah. And with the authority thing, another thing that I was trying to pinpoint is a lack of trust or a losing of trust. So thinking about authority figures and,
Mm.
without getting too political, but politics, of course, is part of this. And I'm seeing a lot in my community reactions to the way different governmental leaders, for example, are or are not addressing this in the ways that we would like them to on different levels. And so there's sort of like this, what do we do when we feel a lack of trust in our leadership or in even the information, like a lot of the information that we're getting online from people that we know and trust personally is incorrect, not because they're trying to be misleading, but because they themselves have been misled.
So you can notice that if you feel it in your body, where do I feel that lack of trust? That's basically saying I don't feel safe. Okay. So when you don't feel safe, it's actually a feeling that belongs to a very young part of all of us, which goes back to that vulnerability again. So we reach in and we say, okay, what do you do in a situation like this? And the wise one sounds like Andrea right now, says, pick and choose carefully who you listen to. Go to the Center for Disease Control and just start with that. That's not political. That's science-based. And that's the best that we can do in terms of, what it tells us all the time. The other thing is, remember that there ain't not going to be a better parent in the world. And I'm not talking about your mom and dad. I'm talking about your leaders, your whatever, because we're always going to be disappointed at some point because humans are fallible. So go to your own inner wise source, because that is way more expansive than your intellect, your logic, your instinct, or anything else. It's just like being quiet and going, okay, what would be the optimal way of handling this right now? If you can just get really quiet for a minute, come into this room with me and know that right this second you're okay. What do you think you should do when you hear this person giving a speech and it gets you upset? You think it might be a good idea to keep listening to them or not? So that's another illustration of what I'm saying is, and what you're saying, is that we don't even realize that we've flipped into an activated, anxious state of, fight, flight, freeze, or whatever, because it just feels so right. It's so normal. But our best bet is to help ourselves and each other recognize that we do have a powerful tool, and that is to be aware and alert of this anxiety and that it's going to show up. None of us are immune to it. And that when it does, we can pause and breathe and do it again and again and slow ourselves down until we can hear that still small voice of loving kindness or concern or just something that reassures us that in this moment right now, like Eckhart Tolle says it, in the present moment, the pain body cannot thrive in the light of conscious presence. Okay, so that's one way of saying it. We can look at the scriptures in every path of life, and there's going to be wisdom in everything that will take us back to this stillness in which we can regroup and regather, restore, and come into that alignment with ourselves. Fits perfectly with yoga, of course. That's the way back home to ourselves.
What about loneliness? Because I see two different things happening. One are people who are shelter in place with family members, like right on top of them, and are like, oh my God, if only I could be alone right now. And then the flip side, a lot of my community members are single, live alone, and just completely going out of their minds with being alone all the time and not having any human connection. Of course, we have these tools like the online conferencing, Zoom, et cetera. But a couple of friends of mine who we've been having in-person dinner parties quite regularly, we tried to do an online dinner party on Zoom where we all made dinner at the same time and, had a glass of wine and we were connecting. And it just wasn't really that satisfying.
I hear you. I thank you for sharing that because I think it's really common. I think both of those extremes are really common. Not having boundaries with each other for people that live together and just getting on each other's nerves, and then the loneliness on the other end. And I have a single friend who said it really well the other day, and he said, it's something that you get through. So I think we have to once again realize it isn't the circumstances that are so bad. It's what we're telling ourselves about the circumstances. If all of us just stepped up a little bit more, one step, and got a little bit more honest and accountable about the stories we're telling ourselves, we'll see that we're creating and feeding our suffering so much by those stories like, oh my God, the poor me stories or ain't it awful stories or, what if stories or like, I can't believe it stories. And these get recycled and they just dig themselves into our sense of well-being, back to the choice. In every moment, it says in Deuteronomy, I put before you the blessing and the curse. Choose life. This is a little manual for us. It says, you can play Marco Polo with yourself. Anytime you feel like it, you can just go Marco Polo. And then you have to ask yourself, is my thought right now life enhancing or is it life depleting? Let's get honest. Am I doing a self-pity thing? That's not life enhancing. Am I doing a gratitude list? That's life enhancing. Am I doing okay, Ellen, what can you do with this moment that would be healthy? That's life enhancing. Am I like, I hate my life, I'm going to go eat a bag of chips? That's life depleting. Like I'm an older woman, as you know. So, of course, I don't look like it or think like it or act like it, but I am. And what I do know from my life on planet Earth for a while is it's just, we don't, we try to get away with blaming and feeling sorry for yourself. At the end of the day, I have a lot more choice than I kind of sort of want to know sometimes. I'm not a victim of circumstances as much as I start believing I am. Okay, so I'm going to be alone for a little while. Somebody said to me yesterday in a session, she goes, and she, like the week before had been like in a real big self-pity thing, pity pot, pity pot. But yesterday she was saying, you know what? The world is actually starting to heal right now. The environment is healing. The sky is healing. We have less pollution. The earth isn't rattling around as much. Things are actually starting to settle down. I think I can handle being isolated for a little bit if it's going to help the earth. Now, obviously, I don't know that it's going to have a long-term effect, but watching her change in her thought process was really interesting for me because she had shifted from poor me, it's all about me and my inconvenience and ain't it awful, which by the way, I'm not minimizing sadness and loneliness, that kind of stuff. But when you have people that are in your face, it's forcing you guys to learn how to communicate in a sober way, an emotionally sober way. How are we going to do this mindfully? How are we going to respect each other? We as a group have to figure this out. And on the other hand, how am I, parent to child within me, how am I going to help me? How am I going to be the best friend to me during this time of being alone? How can I do that? How can I upgrade my experience? Because otherwise I'll just start rolling down a path into negativity. And before I know it, I won't be able to get out of that because I'll be in a rut and then I'll get, quote, depressed. But really, it's kind of, as they say, suffering of our own making.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe the answer to this one is what you've already been saying, but the second to last thing I have on my list is grief. And I think that this is one of those emotions that it wouldn't have come to the top of my mind that that's what I was experiencing. But I heard it on another podcast where they were talking about the grief that you feel when something is physically lost, but you haven't mentally let go of it, versus the grief that you feel when something is mentally lost, even though it's still there. There's loss of people, which is happening. Fortunately, that hasn't touched me personally yet in this moment. But there's also like this grief that's a little bit more subtle, that's even to the point of this particular family-owned restaurant that I love in my neighborhood is temporarily closed. They gave up on the curbside delivery thing, and they don't know if and when they will ever be able to reopen. And so that business, which has been here longer than I have in Chicago, that is an important part of my life, though it's, just a restaurant, is gone. And it hits me in the chest.
But believe me, Andrea, these are the things that we were talking about in the beginning. Like you said, we can't control that stuff. Your loss of it, which I really want to focus in on, it is like a real loss. Like I was telling someone just today, when my mom died, it took me way over a year to stop going, I need to call mom. Okay. So how often are we saying, oh, I need to go to CVS or I need to go, wherever? We're just so used to that freedom. We're used to that comfort and that convenience. So we're all experiencing a loss on that level. And we are, to some degree, watching some news and seeing some numbers. So even though those people haven't been in your immediate life, we're all hearing more and more stories that are impacting us, a friend of a friend or something like that. And we are definitely experiencing loss every day. So it's true that I don't mean to sound like a cheerleader here or, like Pollyanna. Yeah. I am also going through my vulnerability right now. And as I told you in the beginning, the best thing I can give myself is a lot of grace, a lot of latitude, a lot of space to go, hey, Al, you're vulnerable whether you know it or not. And all of these things that you just brought up are part of that. I've lost a lot. We've all lost a lot. We're getting the constant drip of information from media and also just looking around us that something's up, something's off. So it's all a call to the parts of us that can bring us back into now, that can remind us, even with a visual inside your head, close your eyes. What would it be like if I imagined someone that was really safe or wise coming to me and wrapping me in a shawl or a blanket and basically just soothing me with words of, this is going to pass and it's going to be a memory at some point, and we're all going to come out of it. And we're very fortunate in this moment right now that everything that we need is basically here and people are helping each other. And for the most part, things are as good as they can be and as they almost ever are. They're just a little different and we're okay. So yeah, that self-soothing is a huge part of what we can amp up. Whereas the futurizing, buying stock in thoughts and planning that we have no control over, or even assuming that something's going to be wrong about that restaurant. What if you just said, yep, it's more evidence that we're all in this together. I'll be there for them and they'll be there for me. And we got this, So it's us. It's us. And humans, especially because we're mammals, we need an us. We are social beings. We get our sense of aliveness and well-being out of knowing that we're part of something bigger. So that memory, that reminder is really good for us, mind, body, and spirit.
I have a question mark here. I just wrote down the word faith, question mark. And I'm not 100% sure what my specific question is around this, except that I was listening to podcast industry statistics, as that is my job. And in general, podcast listening is down right now, 12 to 20%, for those who are curious overall. However, there are certain categories of podcasts that are up many, 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 sometimes even more than 100%. And one of those categories is religion and spirituality.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
And I'm curious for people who you've talked a lot about reaching inside for that inner wise person and for that comforting and for your being your own best parent. But you also briefly said, sometimes you can look outside of yourself as well for these support systems.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on this topic of faith and external support?
I love it. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I'm so glad you had that little one-word question because it's a bit controversial, right? There's no universal approach to faith. A lot of my patients or clients are agnostics or atheists and really uncomfortable. A lot of them have had really negative religious experiences in their life. So we're not talking about religion at all. We're talking about what we can have faith in. So when I say someone external, it could be an archetype, like what would that imaginary wise woman or wise man be like, or a wise leader? And it could be an imagined ancestor or imagined future self even. It can be obviously a spiritual kind of connector. Christians can access their connection to Jesus or to Mary or saints. Hindus have their deities, their deity of choice, Ishta Devata. The Buddhists can go to the Buddha as being the source of wisdom. Muhammad can be the source of the prophecies and the prophets, prophecies that he gave us. Whatever that source is, it has the same elements of nature. And a lot of people that I've talked to have just gone straight to the source of nature, which is also the Native American path. So think of it this way. The grass is growing even if you can't see it. No matter what's going on, the buds are still coming out on the trees today. I even see some daffodils in full bloom. As we bring our inner gaze to this imagined reality, which is out there, it's real, it's palpable, that life goes on, then we are connecting with that life-enhancing kind of vibration or source. Spirituality is wisdom, the wisdom that brings us beyond our intellect, beyond our immediate experience or our life experience into, here's the light that's going to shine us in a direction that's going to help us. It's going to help us feel better, feel more empowered, basically feel more at home in ourselves and our bodies. Spiritual teachers, there are many, and these, thank God for all of these teachers that we have, whether it's audible books or podcasts. Tara Brach has a great podcast with meditations, and there are so many others. Jack Kornfield. Byron Katie. And I think just going to even YouTube and looking for meditations if you don't want to go and buy an app. So I recommend that.
Wonderful. You've already said so much good stuff for us
Oh,
and
thank
shared so
you.
much wisdom. But is there anything else? I mean, I usually end with advice, but you've already given a ton of that. So is there anything else that's on your mind or on your heart to share with our audience?
Right now, it would be this. We were born with gifts. Everybody can access them. Why cheat ourselves? Why be frugal or anorexic about these gifts? I think we should indulge in them. The gift in sitting still and feeling like you're sitting in your own lap, or you're holding your little girl or boy self in your lap and you're feeling connected. I sometimes say the Holy Trinity, excuse me if I offend anyone, is your inner child, yourself, and your higher self. This little happy threesome, because you're going to be with you every minute of your life, you know? And guess who knows you better than anybody? You. Be kind to yourself. Be thoughtful. Be thoughtful about the way you want to be with you. And don't underestimate the value of being, because if you overestimate producing and, getting to the goal, and that's all you do is calculate and think and plan and create and produce, then this other side, which in the yoga world we call the yin side, this yoga of spaciousness and allowing and expanding the receptive part of us, it has to be valued and included in this journey. And I think that's going to be our saving grace in terms of setting ourselves up to thrive during this pandemic, during times of crisis, or any time of stress in our lives.
I feel better already. I'm so grateful to Ellen for sharing her wisdom and insights with us. There was a moment in the conversation when I was talking about grief, and I mentioned how I was feeling sad over potentially losing a locally owned restaurant that I love, which may seem like no big deal in the grand scheme of things. I mean, businesses come and go all the time, and there are no shortage of restaurants to choose from in Chicago. But I think what I actually meant and couldn't quite articulate in the moment is the grief over the loss of a particular way of life. Aspects of my own identity that are made up of the activities and choices and interactions that I make on a daily basis. Like, do I really want to live in a world where I don't get to travel to India because air travel really isn't a thing anymore? Or podcast conferences can't happen and we go back to being friends and colleagues online only and never see each other face to face? Where the post office gets shut down and I have to pay a private company every time I want to send anything that's not virtual? Where there are no independent family-owned businesses and restaurants. It's just corporate-owned chain after corporate-owned chain. Same, same, same. I know that we are resilient, adaptable creatures, but I still can't help feeling a sense of loss. And then not really being sure whether that loss is just temporary or are there real long-term implications that we have to prepare for? I don't know if that makes any sense to you in this moment or if you can relate. But I do know that after having this conversation and then listening back to it during editing, I did start to think about what Ellen offered, which was to, instead of imagining a future where these things don't exist, where these things go away, where they are lost to us forever, to imagine, well, what if the future is that they can survive? And what if the future is that we are still here, all in this together? And I started to think of ways that I can still value and put forth support to those things that I want to see continue. So, for example, there's a local bookstore in my neighborhood called Volumes that I don't honestly go to all that much, but they do host some storytelling events and other things that I do like to attend from time to time. And I just really love the idea of an independently owned small bookstore, cafe, and event space in my neighborhood. And I would rather that not turn into some generic corporate big brand store. And right now they're struggling because they have inventory and they can't really work. So they have a GoFundMe. And while I don't have piles of cash sitting around, there are things that I'm not spending money on, like Uber and Lyft. And so I'm taking a look at my budget and my resources and figuring out how can I redirect some of that money that would normally go out into the economy for brands that I don't even love, but I make use of them because they make my life easier or more convenient, and use some of that money to support the things that I would like to continue to see in my world. And it may help, it may not. They may survive, they may not. I have zero control over that. But what I can control is redirecting the resources and the energy that I have toward creating the world that I want to see on the other side of this. And that, at least, makes me feel just a little bit better. Once again, I want to invite you to check out links in the show notes for resources on podcasting, whether you are a current or aspiring podcaster, for how you can get together with me twice a week on a low-pressure community Zoom. And quick side note, this episode is coming out, I believe, on a Sunday. And this Sunday marks the first day that I am able to live stream my weekly Bhakti Vinyasa Flow yoga class. Did you even remember that I teach yoga here in Chicago? My yoga studio, another of those independently owned local businesses that I would like to see not only survive, but thrive through this time, is offering online classes in a very special streaming membership. And the cool thing is, for the first time ever, you don't have to be in Chicago to take my yoga class. We'll be streaming this particular class on Sundays at noon Central Standard Time. Check your time zone. We do a gentle yoga practice that is appropriate for all levels of experience. No fancy props needed. And I play harmonium and sing mantras that you can either listen to or you can sing right along with me. I'll teach them to you. And if you've never taken a yoga class with me at Satnam before, I have a very special promo code for you to try your first one free. So check the show notes for the link to sign up and the promo code. I would love to see you there. Thank you once again to our guest, Ellen Katz, whose therapy practice is Inner Balance in Northbrook, Illinois, to Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine for mixing this episode, and to Jovia Armstrong for our theme music. I thank you so much for listening, and this week I am giving you permission to be your own best parent and do whatever it is you need in order to take the very best care of you.